His next punch could kill me. Crazy Kevin, his last opponent, lay writhing on the floor, holding a rag to his bleeding nose, desperately trying to breathe after the wind had been knocked out of him. The fight, if you can call it that, lasted less than a minute. Mike came at him flailing, hitting him repeatedly, head and body, head and body, head and body, until Kevin crumpled into a heap on the floor, moaning, clutching his head in his belly, and everyone laughed. Now, Mike wasn't especially tall, he didn't have an unusually long reach, but what he did have were these fantastic Popeye arms from all the heavy lifting farm work that he did, throwing bales of hay around and shoveling wagon loads of silage. We were at Prune's place. Poor Prune. He had very short black hair that was tightly wired, and he had this remarkably withered face, hence the nickname. But we liked hanging out at his place, because occasionally he'd take us out to the barn and he'd pull the wraps off his brother's car. It was a shiny yellow Corvette Stingray. His brother Charles was in the US Army, and he had used all his Army pay to buy that car. But you could tell just by looking at Prune's face, every time he looked at that car, he was conflicted. If his brother came back from Vietnam, he'd have his brother. But if his brother didn't make it back, Prune would get the car. That's a tough choice for a 16-year-old. Back to the fight. We were in Prune's dingy basement. It had a dank smell like rotting potatoes. There was nothing but a bare concrete floor and naked light bulbs dangling from the floor joists above, but we had put some old couches and chairs in there, and conveniently, Prune's parents were often going out on Saturday nights, so we had the place to ourselves. And if we could get somebody to buy us beer, all the better. Except for this one week, some idiot decided to buy a couple of pairs of cheap, lightweight boxing gloves and bring them to Prune's place for our beer up. Ty, whose last name was Kuhn, who would name their kid Ty Kuhn? Anyway, Ty was acting as the ringmaster, and he slapped a pair of boxing gloves to my chest and grunted, "Put them on, you're next." How did I get here, and who were these yahoos trying to kill me? My parents were disturbed about what was going on in the inner city, so they moved us out to the county to this 4-acre hobby farm for our protection. But at that moment, I wasn't feeling very protected. These guys were my weekend friends. They were a scruffy bunch of rough and ready farm boys with cow manure on their boots and often a cigarette dangling from their lips. In their world, they valued toughness and strength and the ability to endure pain. They thought it was hilarious to jab you with an electric cattle prod or body check you into a pile of manure. Now, most of these guys would be married before they were 20, willingly or unwillingly, often with a kid in tow, and why not? High school was over. This is what you did next. You got yourself a job, and you got yourself a wife, and maybe you worked in the city in a car factory or on the farm, or you did both. There were a few other options, except just clocking away the years and grabbing as much gusto from life as it raced by. Now, that was one world I navigated. The other world involved my weekday friends. I commuted into the city to attend an all-boy university prep school. It was run by Catholic priests, and they kept us in line, often with a yardstick across their knuckles or our backside, or if we were especially mouthy, they'd lob a chalkboard eraser at our head. Now, in that world, they valued scholastics and sports, and at that school, we excelled at both. Now, my classmates, they weren't unwashed farm boys. They were the sons of the city's elites. They were the sons of the doctors and lawyers and judges. They had parents who wanted their kids to get trained up so that someday they would run the city or maybe the country. At our high school, we didn't even have shops or shop classes. That would have been a waste of time and space. You know, why train us in auto mechanics and woodworking and risk us losing our fingers on the table saw if we were supposed to all go off to university? I took the gloves from Ty, and I started looking at Mike, and he was enjoying this way too much. I think Mike must have figured that I needed to get pulled down a peg or two because I'd been blabbing so much about going off to university and leaving these suckers behind to work in the fields and play in the dirt. I also knew that if Mike did kill me, he would think it was a big joke. Mike had these enormous fists like sledgehammers. He could do tremendous damage to me. And me, I was physically underdeveloped. I had no training as a boxer. I was probably 20 pounds lighter, and my arms were like limp spaghetti. The only thing, or the heaviest thing I ever lifted was a copy of the Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. And even if I got my lights punched out quickly, that would be okay with this crew. But if I didn't at least accept the challenge, I'd rank lower than Harry. So I started putting the gloves on very slowly, like a doomed man taking the slowest and smallest steps as he made his way to the gallows. Eventually I had to step forward warily and face Mike, and we started dancing around in circles like I'd seen boxers do, but mostly I was just running backwards, trying to maintain as much space as possible between me and the many punches Mike was trying to land. I figured if I could just keep up this backward dance long enough, I could tire him out. But within a minute, I knew this tactic was failing, as my friends started yelling, "Quit being a chicken, step in there, take a swing at him." And it was a setup, and I knew it. They just wanted to see my blood and perhaps my brains splashed over the ground. And it was becoming clear I was tiring out before Mike was, and that was going to be fatal. Just then, thank God, Prune's parents came home. I saw the basement stairs lights flick on and some stumbling at the top of the stairs. His dad had tripped over the case of beer we had left over there, and once he had figured out what was going on, he started yelling and screaming, "There'll be no underage drinking in my house. Everyone get out, now." So the party ended immediately, and Mike never got a chance to rearrange my face with his fists. So we poured out of Prune's place and trundled over to Cozy Corners. We filled up a few booths, and as it turned out, it was Mike sitting right across from me, and he started grinning. "You lucky bastard," he said. "I was going to kill you, just for laughs." After we had had our burgers and fries and figured we had pestered the waitress enough, it was time to go home. Mike lived on the farm next to ours, so we walked home together. Now, there was something about the quiet of walking a lonely country road in the moonlight that loosened his lips. He started talking and he couldn't stop. It was only his slight stutter that slowed him down. A couple of things he said is he felt only two things. He said he felt trapped and numb. He said he felt trapped because he could see his whole life laid out before him, even at that young age. He didn't have the education ticket like me to take him out of there. His life was destined to be just like his dad's and his grandfather's. On the laneway going into his property, there was a plaque that said Century Farm, and that was an indication that that farm had been in that family for 100 years. Mike recognized that he was just a caretaker. He would operate the farm for a few years, and he would pass it on to his son. He figured his life wasn't going to amount to much. The second thing he said he felt was numb. He said that he never saw much occasion for joy or any other emotion, so that's why he took to pain, both giving it and receiving it, just so he could feel something, anything. After that, he was quiet, and if I'm not mistaken, I saw his eyes begin to glisten in the moonlight. After that night, Mike became kind of a protector for me, my muscle, as it were. It was almost as if he was embarrassed about oversharing his innermost secrets on that walk home, and that in exchange for his services, I was supposed to keep quiet about it. I'll never know, but I was just happy to have such a strong and loyal wingman for the rest of my high school days. I did leave that hinterland. I did go on to university, and I never really went back. I eventually moved several provinces away. But to this day, I've maintained a strong and sincere appreciation and admiration for the world that my farmer friends lived in. Now, that world was a bit too coarse and earthy, and I probably wouldn't have done very well trying to live in it, but it was their world. Anyone choosing to live in it had to value what they valued, which was toughness and strength. Yeah, I never would have asked my farmer friends to help me with my Latin homework. But if I ever needed anything built or fixed or crushed, I knew just who to call. And there's good in that.